Focus our attention, our hearts and thoughts and minds today on the opening prayer. God of might, giver of every good gift, put into our hearts the love of your name, so that by deepening our sense of reverence, you may nurture in us what is good. And by your watchful care, keep safe what you have nurtured. I'd like to focus particularly on the first phrase, giver of every good gift, and then seeing how this prayer upholds for us our sense of we rely on God for everything. So even having a love of God's name, we have to ask God to put that into our hearts. We can't create that on our own. We can't pull ourselves up, as it were, by our own spiritual bootstraps. And then it's God we're asking to deepen our sense of reverence for him. And this phrase, God's watchful care. Our opening hymn, We Gather Together, captures a sense of God's watchful care when it's the words, beside us to guide us. That God is right here. God's not out there somewhere past the last galaxy, every once in a while glancing down at us. He's right here, beside us, to guide us. And obviously within us also, through the sacraments. Every good gift, this opening prayer asserts and recognizes, comes from God. But none of those gifts would matter if we didn't exist and if we weren't alive. And so the fundamental good gift from God is the gift of life and existence. I recognize in myself that one reason that thought of the gift of life, the sacredness of life, is on my heart and my mind because of one delightful element of an event that Patty Frailer and Mary Nisbet, who's here, and I went to last week, the 2024 summit of a movement that we're a part of called Amazing Parish. And one of the groups there was this wonderful group of nuns called the Sisters of Life. And their ministry, their purpose, is to help foster a pro-life perspective and to help women who are contemplating abortion to find ways to help them to carry the child to term. So that's their purpose. That's, as we often say in at least Catholic culture, that's their charism. And it's part of our, Catholic culture anyway, that religious orders of nuns or brothers or priests and brothers, like the Jesuits, Dominicans, Sisters of Charity, whatever else, it's pretty common for us to think of them as having a particular charism. One of the things that Amazing Parish staff encourage for us for parishes is to help foster a sharp, vital, guiding sense of purpose and mission and why we exist, is that parishes perhaps ought to think more of themselves as having a charism or particular charisms. So something to think about, pray about, would be what might we see as our charism, or charisms, plural, in St. Elizabeth of Hungary Parish. One of the members of the Sisters of Life, she gave me permission to share these stories. 2 stories that I want to uphold and just proclaim, secondhand testimony, you might say, of God's watchful care. That's why that phrase jumped out at me in the opening prayer for this Sunday. As we say, God, by your watchful care, keep safe what you have nurtured. So here are 2 stories of God's watchful care that one of the members of the Sisters of Life shared with all of us. And they both delightfully have an element of collaboration, cooperation, interaction among the Christian family of faith. So the ecumenical, to use that technical term. So the first story has to do with one of the ministries of the sisters is they have retreats for women who have undergone abortions, have had abortions, to help them deal if they experience grief, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, guilt, whatever it might be, to help nurture and heal them. And part of the retreat, they offer to each woman a rock that she can use to write on the rock some burden on her heart, something that has broken her heart, something that might have made her feel shame or guilt or a heaviness, on her soul and spirit and the like. So each of the women will write those things on a rock, and then they stack them in front of a cross for the rest of the retreat. And then when the retreat is over, they tell the women that the sisters are going to take those rocks and throw them into some body of water to symbolize all those things being swallowed up in the ocean, the vast, infinite ocean of God's mercy and healing and kindness and compassion and freedom. And from the practical side of things, somebody's got to organize it. So every time they have a retreat, there's one sister in the group, wherever they do these around the country, that will organize the day that the sisters are going to go and take these rocks to some body of water and throw them in. But in this particular case, the sister, for whatever reason, didn't get around to it for a while. And finally, on a rainy Monday morning, she said, "This is the day that we're going to take these rocks and throw them into a pond or a lake or something like that." And as they were throwing these, so they're in their habits, in some public park, throwing rocks into the pond. And sure enough, it caught the attention of two women who were walking through the park. They were biological sisters, blood sisters. One, this is the ecumenical side. One is a Protestant minister, and the other one was pregnant. And in her, something about the circumstances of her pregnancy had her troubled. And so they went up to these nuns and asked what they were doing. And when they explained, the woman who was a Protestant minister asked, "Would you pray with my sister as she works through issues with this troubled pregnancy?" So they prayed for the two of them, and then they parted ways. God's watchful care enabling these women in this religious community, because of one sister's putting off the duty of getting the rocks into a pond, crossed paths with these two other women dealing with a very troubling situation in one of their lives. The second story, a couple years later, a Protestant minister, approached the sisters about coming to his congregation and telling them about the work that they do and their ministry and their reason to exist of helping to foster a pro-life culture and to help women in troubled pregnancies. And they agreed, a nice ecumenical Christian unity gesture to go talk to a Protestant congregation. And as they were planning it, the minister kept bragging, like a lot of grandfathers do, kept bragging about his grandson, Peter. And so as he started talking about his grandson, he says, and the thing is, I'm paraphrasing what the nun would have said, but this Protestant minister who approached them to come talk to his congregation said, "Peter's mom had a troubled pregnancy, my daughter, and my other daughter is a Protestant minister. And a couple years ago, while she was still pregnant, my Protestant minister daughter said to her sister, as she was considering an abortion because of whatever were the circumstances of this pregnancy, she said, 'Before you do that, let's go walk. Let's go talk and pray.' And so on a rainy Monday morning, they went on this walk, and they see these women dressed in habits throwing rocks into the pond. And those two stories converged. And the sisters were able to know that they were partly involved in God's watchful care of giving the woman who was pregnant the disposition and the decision to bring her child to birth. God beside them to guide them in his watchful care. I hope we have experienced such things in our lives. If not, I invite you to pray for God to help you be more aware of his watchful care in you and through you for others. Ask God to put into your heart a deeper, more ardent, blazing love of his name. Ask God to deepen our sense of reverence for him, loving, obedient, trusting, childlike surrender to God. Because we are alive, because we exist, having this fundamental, greatest, and perfect gift from God, the gift of life, as individuals and households and families, I invite us every day to read, or maybe for the first time, consecrate or dedicate your existence and your life to God and say, you gave me these gifts, Lord. Put into my heart a greater love of your name, deepen my sense of reverence for you, and help me use this gift of existence and life that you have given me for the good of others and for the glory of your name. And not just as individuals, not just as households, but I'll conclude with this, to pray about that for us as the prayerful, faith-filled family of St. Elizabeth of Hungary. And if you're visiting from other parishes or other churches, may you pray the same for your congregation. Let us be a congregation, and not caring about our reputation, but that it just simply would be the case and the fact that we are a family of faith, ardently in love with God, striving to surrender ourselves to God and to do some good for God and for the church and for the world by the life of Christ, the power of the Spirit, and to the glory of God the Father in us as a family of faith of St. Elizabeth of Hungary Parish.